The ER doors burst open at 2 a.m. Blood on her jacket. Panic in her eyes. She grabbed my hand before I even spoke. "Don't let go," she whispered. Barely conscious. I didn't know her name. I didn't care. 3 weeks later. She showed up at my apartment. She wasn't supposed to know where I lived. What she said next changed everything I believed about love. "My name is Maya Whitfield, 29. An ER nurse in Columbus, Ohio. Raised by a pastor father who taught me love had rules. I had spent my whole adult life hiding who I really was, until the night a stranger's hand refused to let go of mine. Her name was Sloane Carter. Brought in after a crash on Route 33. Unconscious. The passenger door crushed like folded paper. I stabilized her vitals while she drifted in and out, murmuring apologies to someone who clearly wasn't in the room. When she finally opened her eyes, she looked straight at me and said, "You have kind hands." I laughed it off. Called it protocol. But something in her gaze made my chest tighten in a way I didn't recognize. She was discharged 2 days later with a fractured wrist and a business card she slipped into my scrub pocket. "In case you ever want to know if I survived," she said, smiling like she already knew I would call. I told myself I wouldn't. Nurses don't call patients. That was a rule I'd built my whole career around. 3 days passed. I stared at that card more times than I'd like to admit to anyone, especially myself. On the 4th night, I finally typed a text, just checking if the patient in bed 6 survived. She replied in under a minute, "Only if you buy me coffee to prove it." We met at a diner near the hospital, and she talked with her hands, describing the mural she'd been painting when the crash happened. She never once treated me like the nurse who'd seen her at her weakest. She treated me like an equal, and I wasn't used to that. Sloane was a muralist, commissioned by small businesses across the city, and she spoke about color the way other people spoke about religion. I told her almost nothing about myself that first coffee. Old habit. My father always said the less people knew, the safer I stayed. She noticed the silence anyway. "You give a lot of questions and no answers," she said. "That's a nurse thing or a you thing?" I didn't answer. She let it go. But I could tell she'd be back for it eventually. We started meeting for coffee every week, then every few days, always with some excuse about her wrist follow-up that had long since healed. My best friend at the hospital, Priya, noticed the way I smiled at my phone during breaks and asked who he was. I said, "No one," and she raised an eyebrow but didn't push, which was one of the reasons I trusted her more than most. One evening Sloane invited me to her studio, a converted garage stacked with canvases of women mid-motion, dancing, reaching, never quite still. "You paint people like they're always about to leave," I said. She went quiet, then admitted she'd never noticed that pattern before. I asked about the small unfinished portrait in the corner, a woman with dark curls. She said only, "That one's not ready yet," and changed the subject. We ended up on her studio floor at midnight, sharing takeout out of the container, laughing until my stomach hurt from something that wasn't the shift. For the first time in years, I forgot to check the clock, forgot to plan my exit, forgot to keep score of how much I'd revealed. She walked me to my car and hugged me a beat longer than a friend would. Neither of us moved to pull away first. Driving home, I gripped the steering wheel and admitted to myself what I'd been avoiding since I was falling for a woman I barely knew. I hadn't let myself feel this since college, since Rachel, since the semester my father found the letters and burned them in the backyard fire pit. I told myself this was different. Sloane wasn't a secret I had to keep. She was just a friend. I almost believed it. The next week she texted a photo of 2 coffee cups and captioned it, "This one has your name on it." Literally. I already told the barista. I realized I was smiling at my phone in the break room again, and this time Priya caught the caption over my shoulder. "Maya," she said slowly, "is there something you want to tell me?" I closed the phone and said nothing, but my face said everything. That weekend, Sloane took me to a gallery opening downtown, introduced me to her friends as someone important, not girlfriend, not friend.
Juste important.
Her friends seemed to already know what that meant. Nobody blinked. It was the first room I'd ever stood in where that felt normal. Walking home, she took my hand without asking permission, the same way she had in the ER. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Is this okay? She finally asked. 3 blocks later. As if she'd only just remembered to check. Yeah, I said. And for once in my life, the fear I usually felt at a moment like this didn't show up at all. She stopped under a streetlight and looked at me like she was memorizing my face for later. I've wanted to do this since the hospital, she said. Then she kissed me. Soft and certain. And every rule my father had ever built into me went quiet for the first time in years. I kissed her back. Right there on a public sidewalk in Columbus, Ohio. Not caring who saw. Which surprised me more than the kiss itself. Walking home that night, I felt something dangerous and wonderful. Hope that maybe I could actually have this without losing everything else. For 2 months, we existed in a kind of bubble, my shifts, her studio, stolen weekends, a relationship that felt like it belonged only to us. She told me about growing up in a wealthy Cincinnati family, her father's construction empire, and the expectations that came stitched into her last name. I told her about my father's church in Dayton, his sermons on sin. The way love in my house always came with conditions attached. We're both hiding from fathers, she said one night. Mine just does it with a checkbook instead of a Bible. I laughed. But it landed heavier than either of us expected. A small dark thread we didn't pull on yet. She started leaving her toothbrush at my apartment. I started leaving a sweatshirt at her studio. Neither of us called it moving fast. It just was. For the first time, I imagined a future out loud. Not in whispers. Not in what if. But in real sentences with her name in them. Then one Sunday, my mother called to remind me about the church picnic. And I felt the bubble I'd been living in start to crack. You should come, Sloane said gently. Or you shouldn't. Either way, I'm not going anywhere. I wanted so badly to believe her. I didn't go to the picnic. I told my mother I was working a double. It was the first lie I'd told for Sloane, but not the last. Sloane's father called her that same week, asking when she'd settle down, a phrase she repeated to me with her jaw tight and her eyes somewhere else. He has someone in mind, she admitted finally. Grant Ellison. Old family friend. It's basically already decided in his head. I felt the floor tilt slightly. Decided how? Asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Decided like it's not happening, she said. I promise. I wanted to trust that promise completely. I told myself I did. But a small, cold part of me started keeping score again. Priya finally got the truth out of me over lunch. And instead of judgment, she just squeezed my hand and said, "Took you long enough to tell me. You knew." I asked. "Maya, you've been humming for 2 months." "Of course I knew," she said. And I laughed until I almost cried. Having one person who knew and still looked at me the same way felt like taking off a coat I'd been wearing my whole life. I started to believe maybe I could tell more people. Maybe the sky wouldn't actually fall. Maybe my father's version of love wasn't the only version that counted. Sloane invited me to her cousin's wedding as her +1. No explanation required. No label demanded. Just an open invitation into her real life. Standing beside her at that wedding, watching her laugh with family who clearly adored her. I let myself imagine a version of my own family doing the same. That night, dancing in a hotel ballroom under string lights, she pulled me close and said, "I don't want to hide you. Not from anyone." I believed her completely. I had no idea how soon that promise would be tested. 2 weeks later, my father showed up unannounced at the hospital, saying he'd been in town for a conference and wanted to take me to lunch. We sat in the cafeteria, and halfway through his sandwich he mentioned casually, Your mother saw a photo. You and a woman. At a wedding. My stomach dropped through the floor. Which woman? Asked, stalling, already knowing the answer before he said it. The one with her arm around you, he said, not looking up. Maya. Is there something you need to tell me? I froze between every version of the truth I'd rehearsed 100 times in the shower and never once said out loud to him. She's important to me, I finally said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He didn't yell. That almost would have been easier. He just went quiet, paid the check, and said he needed time to process this. I didn't hear from him for 11 days. 11 days of silence that felt louder than any sermon he'd ever preached at me. Sloane held me the night I told her what happened, and for the first time, I saw real fear behind her eyes. Not for herself, but for me. I did this, she said quietly. No, I told her. He did this. A long time before you existed. I almost believed my own words. Meanwhile, Sloane's father had scheduled a formal dinner with the Ellisons, framing it as just old friends catching up, though everyone understood what it actually was. She came to my apartment after that dinner, pale and distant, and admitted Grant had all but proposed in front of both families at the table. What did you say? Asked, my hands trembling around my coffee mug. I said I needed time, she said. That's not no, I answered quietly. The silence after that sentence lasted longer than either of us wanted, and for the first time, I wondered if I was a complication in someone else's plan. At work, a charge nurse named Denise mentioned offhand that she'd seen me with that Carter girl at the gallery downtown, watching my reaction closely. Small city, she said, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. I felt exposed in a building where I was supposed to feel safest. I confronted Sloane about the dinner again, and this time she admitted her father had threatened to pull funding from her gallery show if she embarrassed the family. Embarrassed how? Asked, though I already knew. By choosing you, she said, and immediately looked like she wished she could take the words back. We had our first real fight that night. Not loud, but cold. The kind where every sentence felt like it was picking at an old scar. I'm not a secret, I told her. I already have a father who treats me like one. I won't do it twice. She didn't argue. She just cried, which somehow felt worse than if she had. I left her studio without saying goodbye. For a week, we barely spoke. I threw myself into extra shifts, and Priya covered for me with excuses I only half listened to. My father finally called, his voice careful, formal. Your mother wants you to come to dinner. Just dinner, he said, like it was a peace offering. I went, bracing for a lecture. Instead, he mostly just watched me across the table, like he was seeing a stranger wearing his daughter's face. I don't understand it, he admitted finally. But your mother said something to me. She said God gave you to us. Not a version of you. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a door left open a crack. And after 11 days of silence, crack felt enormous. I drove straight from that dinner to Sloane's studio, needing to tell her. Needing to fix what had cracked between us before it broke completely. Her lights were off. Her car was gone. A folded note was taped to the studio door, and my hand shook before I even read it. Dinner with the Ellisons again tonight. Family emergency. I'll explain everything. I'm sorry. I stood there a long time before I drove home. She texted at midnight. It's not what you think. Please trust me. I stared at the message and realized I didn't fully trust anything anymore. The next morning, a gallery assistant let it slip that Sloane's engagement announcement to Grant Ellison had already been drafted for the spring show program. I confronted her that afternoon, holding up a screenshot of the draft program like evidence in a trial neither of us wanted to be in. My father printed it before I agreed to anything, she said, panic rising in her voice. I told him no. He didn't listen. That's the problem, I said quietly. He never listens. And you never tell him no loud enough for it to matter. It was the cruelest thing I'd said to her. And I knew it the moment it left my mouth. But I didn't take it back. She looked at me like I'd struck her. You don't know what it's like, she said. To be the only thing keeping your father's company afloat. That's when she told me the truth she'd been avoiding for months. Her father's business was drowning. And the Ellison merger was the only thing keeping it alive. So this was never about embarrassment, I said slowly. It's about money. I'm not a scandal. I'm a liability on a balance sheet. She didn't deny it. The silence between us stretched until it felt like its own kind of answer. Colder than anything either of us had said. I walked out of the studio that day certain it was over. Certain I'd been foolish to believe a whole family history could bend for me. For 3 weeks, I threw myself into work. Picking up doubles. Avoiding my phone. Letting the ER's chaos drown out the quieter chaos in my chest. Priya finally cornered me in the supply closet. You're disappearing, she said. I watched you become someone braver these last few months. Don't undo that now. She chose her father's business over me, I said. Did she? Priya asked. Or did you leave before she got the chance to actually choose? Her question sat in my chest for days. Refusing to leave. No matter how many shifts I worked or how hard I tried to outrun it. Then, one night, a trauma call came in. Multi-vehicle collision on I-70. 3 patients. 1 critical. I didn't recognize the name on the chart at first. Richard Carter. 61. Cardiac arrest at the scene. Sloane's father. My hands went cold before my training took over and pushed me forward. We worked on him for 11 minutes. I called the time of shockable rhythm. Pushed epinephrine. Did everything the protocol demanded. And somehow, we got a pulse back. Sloane arrived 20 minutes later, sprinting through the ambulance bay. And the first face she saw in that hallway was mine. Is he? She couldn't finish the sentence. He's alive, I said. It was close. But he's alive. She collapsed against me, and I caught her. We sat together in the family waiting room for 6 hours that night. Not as exes. Not as anything defined. Just as 2 people terrified for the same man. Somewhere around hour 4. She finally told me everything. Grant wasn't just a business match. He was the son of the bank holding her father's loans. If I refuse him, the bank pulls funding. And everyone my father employs loses their job, she said. 200 people. That's what I was carrying alone. You should have told me, I said. I was ashamed, she admitted. Ashamed that my love for you came with this ugly price tag attached. I realized then how much weight she'd been holding by herself. Convinced that protecting me meant shutting me out instead of letting me help carry it. Her father woke the next morning. Weak but stable. And one of his first requests was to see his daughter alone. No staff. No Grant. Just her. She came out of that room an hour later. Tears on her face. But different tears than before. Something closer to relief than grief. He said he doesn't want the company if it costs him me, she told me in the hallway. He said watching me almost lose you scared him more than the debt did. Apparently, near death has a way of reorganizing a man's priorities faster than any argument ever could. Richard Carter called off the Ellison merger from his hospital bed, choosing a smaller, slower recovery plan for the business over his daughter's forced engagement. Grant Ellison, for his part, seemed almost relieved. He admitted over the phone that the arrangement had never felt right to him either. Sloane found me in the break room afterward. I swollen. Voice raw. I'm free, she said. But I don't know if I broke us beyond fixing. You didn't break us, I said. We both got scared and made it worse. That's different from broken. I wasn't sure I fully believed it yet. But I wanted to. We agreed to talk properly once her father was stable. No interruptions. No hospital hallways. Just the two of us and the truth we'd both been avoiding. That conversation happened 4 days later. On the floor of her studio, surrounded by the same unfinished paintings from the night we first got close. I need you to actually let me in, I told her. Not protect me from things. Just tell me. Even when it's ugly. She nodded, crying quietly. I need the same from you, she said. You ran the second things got hard. I need you to stay. Even scared. That one landed harder than I expected. We sat in the mess of it together. No easy fix. Just two people agreeing to try harder instead of walking away first. That night, she finally showed me the unfinished portrait in the corner of the studio, the one she'd always deflected questions about. It was a woman with dark curls, unmistakably becoming my face the longer I looked. Half finished. Waiting. Like she'd started it the week we met. I started it after the hospital, she admitted. I didn't let myself finish it because I was scared of admitting how much I already felt. I didn't say anything. I just kissed her. Slow and certain. Both of us finally choosing each other out loud instead of in secret. For a few weeks, things felt almost easy again. Our routines rebuilding themselves quietly. Coffee. Studio nights. Longer conversations about things we used to avoid. Then Denise, the charge nurse, filed a complaint with hospital administration, citing unprofessional conduct, after seeing Sloan visit me during a shift change. I was called into HR the next morning, my stomach in knots, certain my career was about to become collateral damage in a fight I never asked for. The HR director, a calm woman named Ruth, reviewed the footage, the visitor logs, everything, and found absolutely nothing improper about a discharged patient's family visit. This complaint appears personal, Ruth said carefully. Do you know why Denise might have an issue with your personal life specifically? I didn't know. Not fully. Until Priya quietly told me later that Denise's ex-wife had left her for a woman years ago, and she'd never healed from it. It wasn't an excuse for what she'd done, but it reframed the cruelty as something smaller and sadder than the threat it had felt like. Denise was formally reprimanded, and administration issued a clear statement reaffirming the hospital's non-discrimination policy to the entire department at the next staff meeting. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I mostly felt tired, and a little sad for a woman who'd let old pain curdle into something so bitter. Sloan showed up outside the hospital that evening with coffee, and a look that said she already knew everything that had happened that day. I'm not going anywhere, she said, before I could even explain. Not for Denise. Not for my father's business. Not for anyone anymore. I believed her more that night than I had at any point since the ER, because this time the promise came with proof behind it. A month later, my mother called and asked, quietly, almost shyly, if she could meet Sloan. Just coffee, she said. Nothing formal. I just want to see her. I nearly dropped my phone. My father hadn't said a word about it, but apparently my mother had been having conversations with him I didn't know about. Sloan and I met my mother at a small cafe in Dayton, and for the first 90 seconds, none of us knew where to put our hands. My mother reached across the table first, touched Sloan's arm gently, and said, "Thank you for taking care of my daughter. She doesn't let many people in." I watched 40 years of my mother's careful, quiet rebellion against my father's rules happen in real time, in a booth by the window, over lukewarm coffee. It wasn't a full acceptance from my father. Not yet. But my mother had crossed a bridge, and I finally understood she'd been building it for years. Sloan's gallery show, delayed twice by everything that had happened, was finally scheduled. And this time the program listed no fiancé, no forced narrative, just her name. She asked me to help hang the final piece the night before the opening, the finished portrait of me, now titled simply Held. Seeing my own face on that wall, painted with that much care, undid something in me I didn't know was still tightly wound. You can say no to this being shown, she said carefully. It's your face. Your choice. I told her I wanted the whole world to see it. The night of the opening, I stood in a gallery full of strangers, holding Sloane's hand in public, in a room with press cameras, and I didn't flinch once. A reporter asked about the piece titled Held, and Sloane simply said, "It's about the night someone saved my life and didn't let go afterward either." I saw my mother slip quietly into the back of the gallery that night, and standing beside her, unmistakably, was my father in his good church coat. He didn't say much. He walked the room slowly, studied the paintings, and stopped the longest in front of Held, staring at it for a full minute. "She's talented," he finally said to me, nodding at the canvas. It wasn't a blessing, but it was the first honest sentence he'd given me in months. Later that night, he found me near the drink table, alone. "I still don't understand all of this," he admitted, "but I don't want to lose you over it." It wasn't the sermon perfect acceptance I used to fantasize about as a teenager. It was smaller, rougher, and somehow more real for exactly that reason. 2 weeks after the opening, Richard Carter, recovering steadily, invited Sloane and me to Sunday dinner at the family house, an invitation that once would have terrified her. "He asked if you liked pot roast," Sloane told me, laughing in disbelief. "My father, who wanted to marry me off for a bank loan, asked about your dinner preferences." At that dinner, Richard raised his glass and said simply, "To second chances, and to daughters brave enough to demand them." Sloane cried into her napkin. For the first time since the crash on Route 33, I watched Sloane exist in her family's house without shrinking herself to fit inside it. 6 months into us, Priya threw a small party at her apartment, insisting she deserved credit as the unofficial matchmaker who covered every single shift. Standing in Priya's kitchen, Sloane pulled me aside, suddenly nervous in a way I hadn't seen since that very first coffee at the diner. "I have something to ask you," she said, "and I need you to know I'm not asking because of my father, or my family, or anyone but me." My heart started pounding before I even understood what was happening, some old instinct in me still bracing for the ground to disappear. She pulled a small ring box from her pocket, hands shaking slightly, and said, "You held on to me the night I nearly disappeared. I want to hold on to you now." I couldn't speak for a full 10 seconds, which felt like 10 years, before I finally managed to say, "Yes." Yes." Priya screamed loud enough that half the party turned around, and somewhere in the noise, I felt the last tight knot in my chest finally loosen completely. I called my mother that same night. She cried happy tears and immediately started planning what she'd wear, already 3 steps ahead of me. My father was quieter on the phone, but at the end of the call he said, "Let me know the date. I want to be there," and meant it. Denise, of all people, sent a card to the hospital break room weeks later. "Congratulations. I was wrong to make this harder than it needed to be." I didn't fully forgive her that day, but I taped the card to my locker anyway. A small, imperfect reminder that people can still surprise you. Sloane's father walked her down a short garden aisle 6 months later, no longer the man bargaining with her future, just a father, finally proud without conditions. My own father stood at the edge of the small crowd, uncomfortable in his role but present, which was more than I'd ever let myself hope for. Priya stood beside me as my best woman, grinning the whole ceremony, occasionally mouthing "I told you so" whenever I glanced her way. When it came time for vows, Sloane went first, her voice steady despite the tears already gathering. "You held my hand when I had nothing left to give back. You didn't let go," she continued. "Not when my father tried to buy my future. Not when the world made it complicated. Not even when I gave you reasons to." I took her hands, the same hands that first grabbed mine in a chaotic air hallway, and said, I didn't know that night I was catching my whole future. I just knew I wasn't letting go. I still don't intend to, I said. And the small crowd of family who once doubted us went quiet with tears. We exchanged rings under string lights. Not unlike the ones from that first wedding where she'd first said she didn't want to hide me anymore. My father hugged me afterward, stiff but sincere, and whispered, "Your mother was right. God gave us you. Not a version of you. I finally understand that now. It wasn't a perfect ending wrapped in a bow. It was messy, a harder one. And because of that, it felt more real than anything I could have scripted." A year later, Held still hangs in Sloane's studio, unsold. "'Cause some things," she says, "were never meant to be for sale in the first place." Denise transferred to another department eventually, not out of shame, she told me once, but because watching us finally healed something in her too. My father still struggles with the language of it all sometimes, still stumbles over pronouns and phrases, but he shows up now. Every single time. Sloane's father funds a small community art grant now, named quietly after the daughter he almost lost twice, once to a crash, once to his own fear. I still work the ER. Still hold strangers' hands through the worst nights of their lives. And I never forget how mine was once held first. Some nights, Sloane meets me at the hospital doors after a hard shift, coffee in hand, waiting exactly where she once refused to let go of me. We don't talk about the wedding program that almost said someone else's name anymore. That version of our story simply never got to exist. What exists instead is ordinary. Ours. Grocery lists. Unfinished paintings. Sunday dinners with fathers who are trying. A life built in the open, not in secret. Looking back, I understand now that the crash on Route 33 wasn't the twist of my story. Refusing to let go, again and again, was. I used to think love had to fit inside my father's rules to count as real. Sloane taught me love only has to be honest to count at all. These days, when new nurses ask how Sloane and I met, I just smile and say, "She grabbed my hand and never let go." Neither did I. That's the whole story. Really. Not a fairy tale. Just two women who chose each other. Out loud. Over and over. Until it finally stuck. And every single time I walk past bed 6 in the ER, I still think about the night a stranger's grip changed the entire shape of my life. Vandy.